In WWE, a big push can make someone feel unstoppable. A new entrance, a dominant winning streak, a few major victories, and suddenly it looks like the company's found its next top star. But not every push ends with a world title, a WrestleMania moment, or a permanent spot at the top of the card.
Brother, this guy stinks!
Sometimes, WWE goes all in on someone, only to lose interest just as quickly. The same wrestler who once looked like the future can end up drifting through comedy segments, random tag teams, or disappearing from TV entirely. So, in this video, we're looking at the biggest fall-offs in WWE history. These are the wrestlers who seemed destined for greatness before their momentum completely disappeared. Some were hit by bad timing, some were hit by bad booking, and some simply never connected the way WWE would have hoped. So let's start off with one of the most bizarre examples of all time, and the reason you clicked on that thumbnail, Lord Tensai. In 2012, after weeks of mysterious vignettes teasing the arrival of a dangerous warrior, Lord Tensai made his WWE debut on the Raw after WrestleMania 28. WWE clearly wanted to make him feel like this terrifying monster, but the presentation was off from the start. The robe, the face paint, the mask, the servant Sakamoto, the green mist, it was all very dramatic, but it looked like a gimmick that had been stolen from the early 90s. And of course, the second he took that stupid mask off, everybody realised it was just A-Train. Nonetheless, WWE persisted with his push by having him squash Alex Riley in his debut and go on to have multiple matches that would end with referee stoppage as he simply inflicted too much pain to his opponents. And then, WWE took it one step further. On the April 16th episode of Raw, from London, Lord Tensai would beat John Cena in an Extreme Rules match. Yes, Lord Tensai beat John Cena in an Extreme Rules match in 2012. And for a few weeks, it genuinely looked like WWE were trying to make Tensai into a major upper card monster. He qualified for the World Heavyweight Championship Money in the Bank match, which honestly is something I completely forgot had ever happened. But not long after that, he lost to Tyson Kidd on Raw in just 19 seconds. And he'd go on to take his frustrations out on poor Sakamoto. After that, the losses just kept coming. He started appearing more on WWE Superstars, his aura disappeared, and by Survivor Series, he was just another body in a mid-card elimination match. And 2013 was not much kinder for Lord Tensai either, as on January 28th, he would officially hit rock bottom. Less than a year after beating John Cena, Tensai was taking part in a lingerie dance-off against Brodus Clay. This was a man who had been having matches stopped because he was supposedly too dangerous, and now he's dancing around in women's underwear on Raw. What happened? Tensai and Clay would form a nothing comedy tag team for the rest of the year before finally splitting up and having one match on SmackDown, which he did at least win. And unfortunately, that was the last we ever saw of Lord Tensai before he returned to his home planet, or whatever his gimmick was supposed to be. Rusev was a slightly different kind of fall-off, because unlike Lord Tensai, he actually connected with the audience. When he first arrived on the main roster in 2014, WWE presented him like a legitimate killer. He had Lana cutting some brilliant promos for him, he had a near 100% record in singles matches, and he even picked up the United States Championship. To top it all off, he literally rode into WrestleMania on a tank. I'll tell you something, they don't give tanks to mid-carders, they definitely saw something in the Bulgarian brute. However, Cena would unfortunately pick up the win in this WrestleMania matchup, stifling the momentum of Rusev for some time. And to be honest, he never fully recovered from it. Just a few months later, he was just another guy trading wins in the mid-card. WWE would split him and Lana up before sticking him in one of the worst storylines of the year with Dolph Ziggler, Lana and Summer Rae, from which there was no return to the main event scene for him. Rusev would continue to meander around the mid-card for the next 5 or so years, getting into nothing feuds and pairing with Aiden English of all people, before being released in 2020. The sad part about Rusev's first run with WWE is that the fans didn't lose interest in him, the office did, and ultimately that's all that matters in this business. Brodus Clay's story is an interesting one, because his fall-off almost happened before he'd even properly started. Brodus Clay felt like someone tried to build Bronson Reed and create a wrestler, and then forgot to put any attribute points into his wrestling abilities. When he first showed up on the main roster, after being introduced through NXT as Alberto Del Rio's rookie, he wasn't dancing around in bright tracksuits just yet. He was Del Rio's towering bodyguard, standing beside him during Del Rio's feud with Edge, and even being in his corner for the World Heavyweight Championship match at WrestleMania 27. So at that point, WWE clearly saw something in him as this dangerous heavy. He would be by Del Rio's side all the way to Extreme Rules, where he took a nasty ladder shot to the head from Christian, busting him open and requiring staples. And after that night, Clay would take some time off to recover and film a WWE Studios movie. Then, towards the end of 2011, they started airing vignettes for his return, and everything about them suggested he was coming back as an unstoppable wrecking machine. Week after week, Laurinaitis would delay his debut, building anticipation for this angry monster, and then, when he finally arrived in 2012, out came the Funkasaurus. Instead of a killer, Brodus Clay was dancing to the ring with the Funkadactyls, shouting, "Somebody call my mama," and squashing people in about 30 seconds while doing comedy moves. WWE had spent weeks telling us that this man was a monster, only to reveal him as a children's party entertainer. Eventually, the novelty wore off, he formed Tons of Funk with Tensai, and by that point, both men basically represented the same thing. WWE taking two big lads who could have been presented as threats and deciding that they'd rather watch them dance. By 2014, Brodus was gone from WWE, and looking back, his entire run feels like one long bait and switch. He went from Del Rio's intimidating WrestleMania bodyguard to a teased monster run to the Funkasaurus. That's less of a character arc and a bit more of a practical joke. Vladimir Kozlov might be one of the cleanest examples of WWE pushing someone too hard before realizing that nobody actually cared. When Kozlov arrived on SmackDown in 2008, he was presented as a completely no-nonsense monster. No flashy entrance, no real personality, just a big angry Russian man walking to the ring, headbutting people in the chest, and refusing to sell. He went undefeated for months, even getting a win over The Undertaker, and by the time Survivor Series came around, he was somehow challenging for the WWE title against Triple H. The only problem was, the crowd didn't really care about him. Yeah, sure, he looked intimidating, but the matches were dry and repetitive, the promos were limited, and the whole push felt a bit forced on the audience. And once his main event experiment was over, the fall off was absolutely brutal. He went from the WWE title to being demoted down to the pits of ECW, hanging around with William Regal and Ezekiel Jackson for the rest of 2009, before eventually becoming Santino Marella's comedy tag team partner. To give him credit, it was an entertaining pairing, and they did go on to win the belts together, but from a credibility standpoint, Kozlov was absolutely finished. And once you've gone from trying to murder Triple H to politely attending tea parties, there's probably no coming back. These days, Kozlov's doing alright for himself, popping up in films like John Wick and The Fast and Furious, so I'm sure his time spent languishing in WWE ECW isn't exactly keeping him up at night. The Great Khali is a slightly different kind of fall-off, because let's be honest, nobody was ever watching him for 5-star classics. When Khali first arrived in WWE in 2006, he was presented as an absolute monster. He debuted by attacking The Undertaker, looked like something from a Final Boss cutscene, and because of his sheer size, WWE instantly treated him like a special attraction, because you know exactly how Vince feels about big sweaty men. And for a while, WWE pushed him exactly like that. He beat The Undertaker, he squeezed Rey Mysterio's head like a grape, he feuded with John Cena, Batista and Triple H, and in 2007 he became the World Heavyweight Champion. So whether people liked watching him wrestle or not, WWE clearly saw him as a huge deal. The problem was, once the novelty of "look how massive this bloke is" started to wear off, there wasn't much else to do with him. Khali was very limited in the ring, even more limited on the microphone, and a lot of his matches felt less like wrestling and more like two people plodding about the canvas for a few minutes. So, when all of Khali's intimidating mystique had vanished, WWE did the only thing they knew how to do with heel monsters that had passed their expiration date. They turned him into a comedy character. Before long, the Great Khali had become the Punjabi playboy. This man went from beating The Undertaker and holding the World Heavyweight Championship from Punjabi prison matches to standing next to Hornswoggle in the space of just a few years. Now, I'm not advocating for Khali's dominant push to have ever ended. I'm saying that they shouldn't have bothered in the first place. To be fair, Khali did seem more natural in the comedy role, and the crowd certainly warmed to him, but from a credibility standpoint, the monster was long gone. And once WWE has turned you from a monster into Hornswoggle's big mate, it's probably safe to say the main event run is over. And to finally end our list, we have the most heartbreaking example for myself, and one of the biggest what-ifs of the 2010s. What makes Barrett's fall off the most head-scratching out of everyone in this video is that unlike Tensai or Khali, he genuinely felt like he should have made it. When Barrett debuted in 2010 as the leader of the Nexus, he immediately looked like a future main eventer. In the same way that when the Shield debuted, you could tell certain members had a massive future ahead of them. Barrett stood out straight away. Sure, most of the rest of the Nexus didn't look quite as promising, sorry Heath Slater, but Barrett had the size, the voice, the presence, and unlike a lot of forced WWE pushes, the crowd actually reacted to him. And for a while, WWE seemed to agree. Barrett was feuding with John Cena, challenging Orton for the WWE Championship, and rubbing shoulders with some of the biggest names in the company at the time. At this point in time, it felt inevitable that he was going to break through into the main event scene. There was just one obstacle in his way: John Cena. First, Team WWE beat the Nexus at SummerSlam, which immediately took away a lot of the group's danger. Then, at TLC 2010, Cena beat Barrett in a chairs match before quite literally burying him under a mountain of chairs. And honestly, that visual ended up feeling a bit too accurate, because after that loss, Barrett never really recovered. The Nexus lost its edge, the less said about the core the better, and Barrett slowly drifted down the card. Sure, he still had his moments, winning the Intercontinental Championship, the King of the Ring, and his Bad News Barrett gimmick was genuinely over for some time, but every time it looked like he might rebuild some momentum, WWE cooled him off, changing direction, or simply just didn't follow through. And that's what makes Barrett so frustrating as a fall-off. He didn't fail because he was useless. He didn't fail because the crowd rejected him. If anything, he had almost everything WWE usually looks for in a top heel. But instead of becoming the next big villain in WWE, he became another guy who spent years floating around the mid-card, collecting stop-start pushes, and never quite reaching the level he seemed destined for. The true bad news for Barrett is that WWE had a main event heel staring them in the face, and somehow they just didn't seem to care enough to make it happen. And that brings us to the end of today's list. If you stuck around this long, thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe for more, and if this one does well, I may even do a part 2, because there are plenty more stories just like this to tell. I've been Kane, thank you for watching.